Have you ever noticed that your life keeps repeating the same pattern over and over, no matter how hard you try to change it? The same type of person keeps entering your life. The same argument, just with different faces, happens again and again. The same disappointment, the same rejection, just when things start to go well, you constantly encounter the same obstacle. It's as if an invisible hand pulls you back to the same starting point every time. You've probably asked yourself, why does this always happen to me? Today, I want to give you an answer that goes beyond just psychology and beyond just physics, because the real answer lies precisely at the point where these two worlds meet. According to quantum physics, an unhealed wound isn't just a memory silently lingering in the past. It acts like an active observer. It shapes the reality you are experiencing today, in ways you haven't consciously noticed. Please listen carefully, because this idea will reshape everything you thought you knew about moving on with life. We're going to take Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, the parts of yourself you've buried, denied, or refused to look at, and place it alongside the observer effect, one of the strangest and best documented phenomena in quantum physics. And by the end of this video, you'll understand something most people don't quite grasp: why their lives are in a constant cycle, and more importantly, what truly breaks that cycle. Here's the promise I want to make to you at the outset: shadow work isn't just about emotional relief. It's not about feeling better after a good crying session or a journaling session. What we're going to explore today is the idea that integrating your shadow works on a level closer to the quantum level. It's about a real shift in which possible versions of your future will actually become reality and which ones will quietly disappear before they even have a chance to materialize. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it in your own mind before we continue. What is the one pattern that keeps repeating itself no matter what you do in your life? Perhaps it's a relationship that always begins with great hope and always ends with the same wound reopening. Perhaps it's a promotion that seemed so certain but somehow slipped through your fingers. Perhaps it's a friendship that always left you feeling used, invisible, or not good enough. Keep this pattern in mind, because everything I'm about to explain will be directly connected to it. Most people try to solve this in the same way, over and over again. They change the external circumstances: a new city, a new job, a new partner, a new beginning, and for a while it seems to work. But then, quietly, almost invisibly, the same underlying story begins to be rewritten, just with new characters playing the same old roles. If you've experienced this even once, you already know the feeling I'm describing. First, we'll address the strange, almost unbelievable physics behind observation. Then, we'll delve piecemeal into why your shadow acts just like a hidden observer inside you. Finally, I'll show you a practical, step-by-step exercise designed to help you start breaking this old pattern today. If you've ever felt like you were constantly fighting the same invisible battle and couldn't understand why you kept losing, this video is for you. Don't leave. What you learn might be the missing piece you've been searching for your whole life. And if you're sitting quietly late at night, wondering if there's something fundamentally wrong with you because everyone else is breaking free from their patterns while yours has reverted to a clockwork-like routine, I want you to hear this clearly before going any further: there is nothing wrong with you. What's happening to you has a mechanism, a logic, a reason. And when you can see that mechanism clearly for the first time, you can also see exactly where your power to intervene lies. Let's start with physics, because once you understand it, psychology will almost instantly fall into place. In quantum mechanics, there's a strange and well-documented phenomenon called the observer effect. At the smallest scales of reality, the electron and photon scale, particles don't behave like solid, fixed objects like a ball or a rock. Until observed, they exist in something called superposition, a fuzzy cloud of every possible position, every possible state, all exist simultaneously, none more real than the others. But the moment an observer measures the particle, the moment attention is turned to it, something extraordinary happens. The entire cloud of possibilities is reduced to a single, definitive result. A single position. A single state. A single reality chosen from an infinite number of candidates, at the moment it is observed. This has been proven time and again in laboratories around the world, most famously with the double-slit experiment. In this experiment, a stream of particles launched toward a barrier with two openings creates a wave-like interference pattern when unobserved. This is proof that each particle passes through both apertures simultaneously as a probability wave. However, the moment scientists find a way to observe which a particle passes through which aperture, this wave pattern completely disappears. The particles begin to behave like solid, singular objects the moment they are observed. Observation doesn't just measure reality. In a real sense, observation helps to determine reality. Now keep this idea in mind and let's turn to something that behaves eerily similarly within your inner world, your shadow. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the sum total of everything we deny, bury, or refuse to look at about ourselves, our shame, our anger, our fear, the parts of ourselves that we were taught at a very young age were unacceptable to show to the world. And here's the critical detail most people miss: refusing to look at something doesn't mean it ceases to exist. It simply becomes unobservable. Like an unmeasured particle in superposition, it continues to operate in the background, present, active, but unnoticed. And an unnoticed shadow does something very special. It becomes a silent observer, directing the show from behind the curtain of your conscious mind. Let me explain what I mean by that. Your conscious mind might say, I want to be loved. I want a healthy relationship. I want success. But if there's a hidden belief beneath that, a shadow belief formed years ago in a painful moment, something like, I'm not good enough, or, the world is dangerous, or, I'll always be abandoned, that shadow belief functions like a hidden observer, constantly collapsing your reality toward its own outcomes, regardless of what your conscious mind claims to want. You say you want love, but the shadow observer still working in the background continues to measure your reality to produce exactly the same disappointing pattern. Not because the universe is punishing you. Not because you're broken. But in a very real sense, that unobserved part of you is still the observing part, and it can only collapse reality toward what it already believes to be true. Let's make this concrete, because abstract ideas like these only become useful when you can actually see them in your own life. Consider someone who learned as a child that voicing their needs leads to being ignored, or worse, punished. That child buries the pain, the anger, the belief that, my needs don't matter, deep down, in the shadows, because at the time it was the safest thing to do. Let's fast forward 20 years. That same person consciously wants a relationship where they feel prioritized and valued. But somehow, again and again, they encounter partners who ignore them in the same way. From the outside, it seems like bad luck or bad taste in partner selection. But underneath, the buried shadow belief still functions as an active observer, measuring each new relationship through the same lens it formed decades ago, and silently guiding the outcome toward the painful pattern it already recognizes. This is where the deeper, stranger part of the idea comes in, the part about infinite negative realities. In quantum physics, every possible outcome technically exists simultaneously in a state of superposition before observation collapses the wave. When applied to your life, this means that before a wound heals, you swim in an infinite sea of possible futures, some painful, some neutral, some truly joyful. But an unintegrated shadow, acting like a constantly repeating measurement, pulls you back again and again toward the same narrow slice of that sea, the painful slice, the familiar slice, the slice your wound already recognizes and somehow feels safest in. Every day, when you don't look directly at that wound, your reality collapses again, turning into another version of the same story. A new coworker who somehow triggers the same insecurity. Somehow the same kind. A new relationship ending in heartbreak. A new opportunity sabotaged in the same familiar way. Here's the real turning point. When this situation ceases to be merely an unsettling observation and becomes something you can actually act upon, what happens when you finally, consciously, turn around and look directly into that shadow? Not with judgment, not with further shame, but with clear, conscious attention, like a scientist observing a particle in a lab. According to this framework, something changes. When you consciously observe the shadow instead of unconsciously manipulating it, you become the new observer. And a new observer, looking with a different attention, with curiosity instead of fear, with compassion instead of criticism, begins to transform reality into a different set of outcomes. Not because the old wound magically disappears. Rather, because there is no longer only one observer holding the measuring instrument. We call this the timeline collapse. Not literally in the sense of parallel universes merging, let's be honest about what we can and cannot claim here, but in the very real, well-supported psychological sense that patterns you unconsciously repeat can continue to repeat as long as they remain unconscious. The moment a pattern becomes conscious, it loses its automatic, invisible influence on your choices, relationships, and opportunities that you either valued or unknowingly sabotaged. Here's a second example, because these patterns manifest not just in relationships, but in many other areas. Consider someone who learned early on that visibility leads to criticism, perhaps a parent who mocked their achievements or a classroom embarrassment that never fully healed. This shadow belief that being visible is dangerous is buried, unspoken, unexamined. Years later, the same person consciously wants to be appreciated at work, get promoted, have their ideas noticed. And yet, the moment visibility becomes possible, they freeze up in a meeting, downplay their own contribution, or silently give the credit to someone else without even realizing it. To anyone watching, this appears to be modesty, bad timing, or simply not being ready yet. But beneath, the old shadow observer continues to make the same measurement they learned decades ago. Every time appreciation approaches, they retreat back into safety, into invisibility. This is the real mechanism behind why people who truly embrace shadow work feel their lives have completely shifted. It's not because fate has rearranged them, but because they've stopped unconsciously measuring the future through the lens of an old, buried wound, and have begun to measure it through the lens of a healed, aware, and conscious adult. Think of people you may know or have heard of who have done serious inner work, real therapy, real contemplation, real honesty with themselves, and whose lives have become almost unrecognizable within a year or two. It wasn't because the outside world suddenly became kinder to them. Rather, it was because they stopped unconsciously recreating the same wound in each new situation, and each new situation finally found space to truly transform into something different. This is how the timeline collapse in human life actually looks, stripped of mystical language, less repeated wound, because there are fewer unconscious observers in the background making the measurement. So the question becomes, how do you actually do this? Instead of waiting for life to force this awareness upon you, how do you consciously become that new observer? That's exactly what we'll be discussing in the next part. Don't leave, because the next part of this video goes beyond theory and becomes something you can actually use starting tonight. Let's make this a reality. I'm going to explain to you, step by step, what I call the quantum shadow exercise, 3 simple steps, but steps that require true honesty, so don't rush just because they look simple on paper. Step 1, identify your quantum pattern. Think of a pattern that constantly repeats in your life, the one that came to mind at the beginning of this video. Maybe it's a type of relationship that always ends the same way. Maybe it's a professional roadblock you consistently encounter just when things start to improve. Maybe it's a certain type of person who always finds you. Whatever it is, name it clearly. Clearly, not vaguely. Instead of bad luck in relationships, be more specific. I consistently choose partners who ultimately make me feel worthless. Instead of, I'm unlucky at work, try saying, I constantly sabotage myself just before recognition or success comes. The clearer the pattern, the more precisely you can observe it, and remember, precise observation is the whole mechanism we're working on here. Now, if you have the time, take a moment and say this pattern aloud or write it in the comments below. Naming a pattern with words is far more effective than leaving it as a vague and uncomfortable feeling. It almost instantly changes your relationship with it. Avoiding vague discomfort is easy. Ignoring a clearly named pattern is much harder. Step 2, observe the feeling without judgment. This is the step most people skip, because it's the most uncomfortable one. The next time this pattern is triggered, which it will likely do sooner than you expect, instead of reacting, instead of numbing it, instead of immediately blaming the other person or situation, stop. Turn your attention directly to the feeling in your body. Where do you feel it? How does it feel physically right now? Here's the most important instruction: just observe. Don't judge it as good or bad. Don't try to fix it immediately. Just observe, like a physicist observing a particle without forcing it to a specific result. This unbiased, non-judgmental act of observation is what begins to transform the old, frozen emotional wave, instead of remaining locked in place for years, into something that can finally move, change, and be released. If it works, write it down afterward. Not an analysis, not a story about who's to blame, just a simple statement: I felt a tightness in my chest. I felt small. I felt I needed to prove something. Putting this into words, however brief, is in itself a form of observation, and over time, you'll notice the same few sentences reappearing again and again. This repetition isn't accidental. It's the shadow pattern that, instead of always working invisibly in the background, finally becomes visible enough to be worked on. Step 3. Consciously choose the new observer. After spending even a minute or two alone with this feeling, ask yourself this question and truly wait for the answer instead of rushing past it: if this fear weren't my reality, if I truly believed something different about myself in this situation, who would I be right now? This is the moment you consciously add a new observer to the equation. Not to make the wound disappear, nor to impose a falsely positive perspective on something real. But to consciously decide, at this particular moment, that the old, fearful interpretation is no longer sufficient on its own to measure what will happen next. I want to be honest with you because I don't mean to exaggerate. This exercise will not instantly erase lifelong patterns in one go. Deep wounds, especially those from childhood or repeated trauma, often require observation in many different situations, many times, for the old pattern to truly loosen. If a wound feels overwhelming to deal with alone, working with a licensed therapist, alongside practices like this, is not a failure but often the right and responsible next step, and there is real power in reaching out for that kind of support. I also want to gently counter a version of this idea that is sometimes misunderstood. This is not about blaming yourself for the suffering that befalls you, nor is it about claiming that every difficulty in your life is somehow a product of your own subconscious. Some things simply happen to us unfairly, stemming from the choices of others, not from our own hidden observer. What we are talking about here is specifically the recurring pattern, the part of the story that reappears, in slightly different guises, long after the original event has passed. It is this repetition that you need to pay attention to. But today I want you to understand this fact: this pattern you constantly repeat is not proof that you are broken, cursed, or unlucky. It is proof that a part of you, without your conscious permission, is silently repeating the same pattern over and over again. And the moment you consciously turn and look at it, truly, with curiosity instead of shame, you've already begun the process of becoming a different kind of observer. An observer who can dismantle your reality into something new. You are not a passive character reliving the same chapter of the story over and over. In a universe based on probability and observation, you are one of the rare observers who have a real say in which version of your future will become reality. Here's the last thing I want to ask you, and I want you to take it seriously, not just nod and close the tab. What is the one quantum pattern in your life that you are now ready to observe instead of avoid? Let me know in the comments. Be detailed. Because naming it, really naming it, aloud, in writing, in a way you can't pretend you haven't seen, is often the first act of observation that sets everything in motion. When you heal a wound, you don't just make peace with your past. You also silently eliminate the thousands of painful futures that wound would constantly drag you into, before they even have a chance to materialize. You are not a victim adrift in an ocean of endless possibilities. You are a conscious creator standing in the middle of that ocean, ultimately learning how to make choices. See you in the next awakening. This was PsyBeyond.